Hi, and welcome back to In the Word. We are in 1 Peter chapter 5 today, finishing up Peter's epistle about suffering, preparing the church for suffering. Sorry, I made a little shake there. Preparing the church for suffering and telling us how to get ready. He began in the first chapter and a half, chapters 1 and 2, talking about the salvation that we have. It's unshakable and secure. Chapters 2 and 3, then, he moved from suffering to submission, which was surprising. I've reflected on it a little bit over the weekend as well, and I'm reading the book of Daniel in my daily readings, and certainly we see Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego submitting to the king at the time, Nebuchadnezzar or Belshazzar, really being submissive to them in their captivity, in their oppression, potentially persecution. So it's interesting to see how God uses submissive saints that are suffering to display His glory. And it is surprising to see it in 1 Peter. It's hard for me to get my head around being submissive to governments and individuals that are oppressing you, but there it is. That's what the Bible says. And then chapters 4 and 5 really talk about suffering as well and the core of it. We get into chapter 5 here. I've got my Bible in front of me, and hope you have yours as well. The first 4 verses there are really addressing the elders, their responsibility during this time of suffering. Verses 6 and last part of chapter 5, actually, and down to 8 is talking about everyone in the fellowship. And then I think that theme continues in verse 9, telling them, giving them more instruction just generally in the fellowship on what to do. And then from verses 12 on is kind of final greetings here. So let's look at this a little bit more detail. Peter turns to the elders and said, I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ. So Peter's not lording it over them in any way. He's not coming down on them like the authority. He's saying, I want to address the elders, and look, I'm an elder too. I have seen Christ suffer. And his main concern for the elders is that they shepherd the flock. And he defines what he means by that. Exercise oversight. Then he has a number of couplets to talk about how they're to do that, their manner of exercising oversight. So, for example, he talks about them being not under compulsion, but willing, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering, but being examples. So he wants the elders to stay in the game as they face suffering, as they face challenges to their church. He wants them to stay in the game and stay in the game in terms of taking care of that flock, providing oversight over them, giving themselves over to that willingly, eagerly, and as examples to follow. I pray that you're in a church like that, brothers and sisters, that you have a church where there are hardworking elders who are actually shepherding the flock. So often we have people in the role of elders who are not shepherds but are more managers. They are more like deacons, I think, that we see in the Bible, in that they manage the business of the church, but not the spiritual aspect of it. And here Peter is saying that for the church to get ready for the persecution that's coming, they need to have elders who actually shepherd the flock. Then he turns his attention from the shepherds to all of you. Notice how he says in verse 5, clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility. Humility is mentioned again at the end of the verse. And again in the beginning of the next verse, verse 8, he talks about humility once more. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God. So humility is essential as the church goes into a period of challenge, a period of suffering, a period of persecution. I don't know if you've looked around lately, but the global church is certainly suffering, and the church in North America is beginning to experience suffering. We're seeing that particularly in Canada. Churches are being forcibly closed, pastors are going to jail, fences are being put up around churches. My view, not going to be much longer before that sort of persecution, that sort of opposition comes into the United States as well. And we see the beginnings of it as we are in a post-Christian culture, and we are seen largely as problems by the non-Christian culture around us. And what are we to do then? All of us is to exercise humility. Humility toward our elders, humility toward the Lord, humility toward each other. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you. Cast all your anxieties upon him, because he cares for you. Then he goes on here, also addressing all. First he addresses the need for humility. Now he addresses the need for resistance, to resist Satan. Be sober-minded. I love that word. He's not talking about not being drunk here. He's talking about being clear-headed. You know, the first thing that happens when we fall under a problem, either a personal problem or a corporate problem as a church, is there's a tendency sometimes to allow our fears to get the better of us and to begin to panic. Peter says, don't do that. Be sober-minded. Understand that your adversary, the devil, prowls around. He's looking for someone to devour. So resist him. That's what he says here. Resist Satan. That's what that section is about. So in the last days here, as we are living in these last days, as Peter was, and Peter's congregations, his flocks, our elders need to be shepherding the flock, not managing the budget, not planning for buildings, but shepherding the flock, being among the people. And we as people need to be humble, receive their ministry, receive the ministry of the Lord, help each other, receive help from each other and offer help for each other. We need to resist the evil one. And finally, at the end here, he has some final greetings. You know, Paul had a large group of people who were with him in ministry, 70 I've counted, and I haven't even looked at the book of Acts. I just counted up the people he acknowledges by name, like Silvanus, who is here, and Mark, that he acknowledges by name in the epistles. Of course, this is Peter, but Paul. So sorry, I keep thinking about Paul. But Peter as well. He wasn't a lone ranger. Church tradition tells us that Mark was actually a constant companion of Peter, and that when that Peter caused Mark to write down his teaching about Jesus, which we have today as the Gospel of Mark. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into 2 Peter. So that's it for today. That's it for 1 Peter. We're moving on in our journey from Romans to Revelation. Remember J. Vernon McGee talking about getting on the Bible bus as he went through the Bible in 5 years. I'm glad you're on the Bible bus with me. Just want to remind you about the Theofaith ministry. In the Word is a one arm of the Theofaith ministry. I have this. The goal of the ministry is really to have you in the Word. I want to encourage you, edify you, want to equip you to be in the Word. That's how you grow as a Christian. That's how you grow in maturity, is through the Word. My view is that God's doing basically three things in the world today. He is saving the unsaved, saving the elect. He is sanctifying the saints, and he is spreading the Word. All three of those things, salvation, sanctification, and the spread of the Word, requires, of course, the Word. So we need to be in it. And that's the ministry that I'm trying to carry out through Theofaith. In the Word is the daily aspect of that. I have a periodic aspect about every 2 or 3 weeks or so, going through more detail a book of the Bible. Right now we're going through Colossians, so look for that Colossians playlist if you're on my website. And then finally, I have these periodic teachings. Right now, I've kind of stopped on one that's still in work about the differences between covenantal and dispensational theologies. I had to put that aside because I had some other tasks to do. But just a reminder, this is kind of a broad ministry. Really blessed that over the last month, I've seen a lot of growth in the ministry. It's still very small, just a couple hundred subscribers, but that's up significantly in the last 30 days. I think I've added about 100 subscribers or more in the last 30 days. So I'm grateful for that. Grateful for you telling your friends and maybe people finding it, searching on YouTube for Bible teaching. So I'd encourage you to tell your friends, keep me in prayer. If you'd like to support us financially, there's a link down below. And just appreciate you guys, appreciate your watching these things. And I pray that, I'm being successful in encouraging, edifying, and equipping you for the ministry God's given you. So God bless you, brothers and sisters. And tomorrow we'll start 2 Peter.